guess, might you be here to discuss what happened last night? And I am going to, since my remarks were not happy, I am happy to give up the floor at this time and listen to their remarks, and I congratulate both of them on just a great victory. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Connecticut.
I thank the chair and I thank my friend from California. One might say in the context of the debates going on in Congress now that Senator Blumenthal and I have come to the floor of the U.S. Senate to talk about a governmental program that really works, that has inspired an entire state, perhaps a nation. And I speak, of course, of the University of Connecticut basketball program. Madam President, it's with great joy that I come to the floor of the Senate today to congratulate the University of Connecticut's men's basketball team and their great coach, Jim Calhoun, on winning the NCAA championship last night. This has been a remarkable season, a team that started unranked, a young team in a year that was supposed to be a rebuilding year, just came together in a magical way. They had their ups in the season early, they had their downs as time went on, but the run that began with the Big East tournament a few weeks ago has, for our state, I think anybody who follows and loves college basketball, really been inspirational. I do want to say, in terms of inspiration, and I suppose I might say in the spirit of bipartisanship, or at least good sportsmanship, to offer congratulations to the Butler Bulldogs on their great run in the tournament, which also was inspirational, and to thank my Indiana colleagues for their good sportsmanship and for what they describe as the best popcorn in America made in Indiana, that as part of a friendly wager they made, Senators Lugar and Coates, with Senator Blumenthal and me, we will be pleased to accept and devour. This has been quite a year. Led by their floor leader, Kemba Walker, assisted by an extraordinary group of young athletes. This group of students, athletes, demonstrated to all of us what a combination of hard work, dedication, commitment, and teamwork can achieve. And honestly, I tip my hat to these top dogs today of college basketball. Of course, in my opinion, no matter how good and how much potential the players had on this UConn men's basketball team, they simply couldn't have done it with their great coach and a great man, Jim Calhoun. This is not the first time I've had the honor to come to the Senate floor to commend the performance of Coach Calhoun and the UConn Huskies. In fact, with last night's victory, Jim has etched his name in basketball glory by winning his third national title. He becomes only the fifth coach in history to win 3 national championships, and he joins the ranks of other greats like John Wooden and Coach K. Mike Krzyzewski. He's only one of 8 coaches to run up over 800 career wins. Over the years, I've watched Jim build upon the athletic program at UConn, transforming it from an occasional regional contender to a regular national powerhouse. His 3 national championships and 7 Big East championships have put our team, the state team of a relatively small state, really on the college basketball map, and set a high standard of excellence. And I think none of this would have happened without Coach Calhoun's vision, his drive, his caring for his players, and his just extraordinary basketball brains. There's a larger lesson, as there often is in sports, but this was a team that came into the Big East tournament with most people thinking the season would end for them quickly. And they had will, which is a word Coach Calhoun uses a lot. They always had the potential and the ability, but they had the will, and they proved to everybody. I'm looking at the Senate pages now, young people. There are a lot of people who read these UConn Huskies out at different times of the season, but they didn't read themselves out of the competition, and their coach never did. He kept telling them they had what it took to be champions. They pulled together, they worked together, they developed their potential to the fullest. They played and lived like a family. You might say Coach Calhoun is the father who employs, the loving father who employs a lot of tough love, but drew greatness out of these players and gave all of us in Connecticut a tremendous sense of pride. I don't want to finish my statement without also telling the Coach Gino Auriemma and the great players on the UConn women's basketball team how proud we are of them and how much we thank them for another remarkable season that was also filled with historic accomplishments, including an impressive run to the Final Four and a record-breaking 90 consecutive win streak. The Lady Huskies were led by the all-impressive Maya Moore, who achieved AP All-American honors in each of her 4 seasons at UConn and scored over 3,000 career points. So I give my congratulations to Coach Gino Auriemma and to the players on the UConn Huskies. Lady Huskies also made us proud. Madam President, I'm going to yield the floor in a minute to my colleague, Senator Blumenthal. It strikes me that this is the first time I've had the chance to celebrate here when my former colleague, Senator Chris Dodd, is not here. The first time we celebrated together on the floor, I ended my remarks with the UConn cheer. Afterwards, Senator Dodd, then the senior senator, gave me a hard time as to whether I would make a good cheerleader and whether it was a decorous thing to do on the floor of the Senate. I told him at the time that it could have been worse. I could have just done the UConn Huskies woof, W-O-O-F. But now I'm the senior senator. And may I conclude, Madam President, by simply saying, U-C-O-N-N, UConn, 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 national champs. I know that my N needs a little work, and I'll be working on that from now until next year when hopefully we secure another championship. I thank the chair, and I yield the floor to Senator Blumenthal.
I thank the senior senator from Connecticut for that very, very eloquent tribute to our team, and I am not going to try to match the cheer this year, but perhaps next, and I thank him for providing such a model of support for the University of Connecticut. Truly a government program that works, but also obviously one that is completely non-political, bipartisan, perhaps providing another lesson for us here, and I'm very honored to rise in celebrating this really remarkable accomplishment. This majestic and really momentous victory culminates a kind of magical journey for this team. They really defied the odds. They disproved the doubts and the doubters, and they stared down adversity with real grit and grace. Remember that they rallied after losing 4 out of 5 of their last regular season games, and then had an extraordinary streak of 11 straight wins to win the Big East and then the NCAA championship. And they were just relentless and courageous in believing in themselves throughout that very, very tough battle. At some point, as someone said, this team forgot how to lose. Again, a life lesson for many of us. As in every remarkable triumph, this one had a team effort, and it had stars. Kemba Walker was perhaps the most notable among them, and he won awards that recognized his remarkable individual effort. But there were also freshmen who were important. I say that as a freshman senator, Jeremy Lamb and Roscoe Smith, and as important as any player, as my colleague has recognized, was Coach Calhoun, who really demonstrated again the reason that he is a champion and a hero to Husky fans throughout the state of Connecticut and the nation. He gave his team strength at the critical times, and he drew that strength from his own life experiences. Just last Sunday, he recalled his days shortly after his father's death when he was pumping gas and cutting stone and collecting metal in a shipyard in Massachusetts. He's a fighter and he's a leader. And the UCONN basketball program has come a long way under his leadership. Many recall the days when they had no championships and certainly no winning teams. The program began in 1901 with a season that consisted of a single game against Wyndham High School. And it was 98 years until Coach Calhoun won them their first championship and now their third. He won that championship because of the great playing of those teams and the players who have gone on to performances that are remarkable in other leagues. I want to join in paying tribute also to Gina Auriemma and the Lady Huskies. They came very, very close, heartbreakingly close to another championship, and Maya Moore and every member of that team deserves our gratitude and admiration. And there's no doubt that both teams, both of them, have a bright future. I look forward to being here again next year and celebrating another Huskies victory, hopefully by both the women's and the men's team next year. And thank you, Madam President, and I'm happy to yield the floor. And I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Earlier today, senators passed a bill 87-12 that repeals a rule requiring businesses to report payments of more than $600 to vendors. Lawmakers now moving back to legislation on small business and technology programs. Today, President Obama said it's more urgent than ever to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians. He spoke today after meeting with Israeli President Shimon Peres at the White House. The Associated Press writing that the president told reporters the two had an extensive discussion about the unrest sweeping the Middle East. President Peres will be interviewed by CNN's Wolf Blitzer tonight at the U.S. Institute of Peace. We'll have that conversation live here on C-SPAN 2 at 8 Eastern. Another story we're covering today, federal spending for this budget year, which expires on Friday, and a GOP proposal for next budget year that was released today. The Associated Press writes that the White House is rejecting a Republican plan to cut trillions of dollars in government spending over the next decade, saying it would spare the rich and burden seniors, the poor, and workers who would lose their health care. The House Budget Committee will meet tomorrow to mark up, that means make line-by-line changes to the 2012 budget proposal in a day-long session expected to go late into the night. We'll have live coverage of the whole meeting on C-SPAN 3, C-SPAN Radio, and at cspan.org starting at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow.
Mr. Alexander.
President.
Senator from Illinois.
As consent, the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, Paul Ryan is a congressman from Janesville, Wisconsin, and I know it because it's right across the border from Illinois. I have relatives and friends who live in the area, and I like Paul. I served with him on the Bowles-Simpson Deficit Commission. We spent a lot of time together. He's a very bright person, and he's been given a big assignment in the House of Representatives as chairman of the House Budget Committee. He and I have different views of the world and of politics, and as you can imagine, we might see votes a little differently on the floor, but I respect him very much for his intelligence. But he's laid out a plan now for the House Republicans, a budget plan, which is very specific in the goals that he set for America. Now, there are some things that Paul and I agree on. We agree on the fact that we are facing a deficit crisis in this country. We cannot continue to borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend. It's unsustainable. And we borrow the money from countries like China. China is a nation that is hard charging and competing with the United States, and they're one of our major creditors. Now, that's a delicate position to be in when a country that you're competing with for jobs and economic growth also happens to be your banker, your creditor. That's the case. We can't sustain that. And as we watch our national debt increase, we understand that we have to take serious measures to deal with it. This morning at a bipartisan meeting of senators, which the President attended, we had the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Kent Conrad, describe our current situation. We have, at this point in time, about 14% of our gross domestic product is coming into our government in revenue, which is the lowest percentage in 60 years, and the expenditures of our government represent about 24% of our gross domestic product. The difference, the 10% difference between revenue and expenditure equals deficit. Now, we have to reach a point where we are prepared to cut spending and make changes that will lead to a more stable economy and deal with our deficit honestly. There were two state legislators who wrote a letter to the New York Times several weeks ago that caught my attention, a Democrat and a Republican, and they were talking about their state challenge, and they said, we've come to the conclusion that we can't cut our way out of it, we can't tax our way out of it, we've got to think our way out of it. We've got to really focus on changes in government policy that reduce waste and inefficiency and move us toward, in their case, their state budget, toward a more solid position. I think the same lesson applies in Washington, that we have to be thinking about what we need to do to move forward so that our children and grandchildren don't inherit the deficit that we now face. The deficit, which of course is growing by the day. I always like to give a little historic perspective here so that people understand where we are and how we arrived there. And I ask people to think back to the year 2000, if they can. And in the year 2000, President William Jefferson Clinton was leaving office and President George W. Bush was coming in office. Snapshot. What was the state of America then? Well, the snapshot would tell you that we had a national debt in the year 2000 of $5 trillion. The accumulated net national debt of America when President Clinton left office, $5 trillion. We were in our third year of generating a surplus. That is, more money coming into our government than being spent. The surplus was being put into the Social Security Trust Fund and buying more years of solvency for the Social Security Trust Fund. President Clinton, as he left office and handed the keys to the White House to President George W. Bush, said, and next year, this coming year, fiscal year that you will inherit, 2001, you'll have a $120 billion surplus. Welcome to Washington. Well, now fast forward 8 years later. The year is 2008. President George W. Bush is leaving office, handing the keys to the White House to President Barack Obama. What was the national debt? It was $5 trillion when he came into office, President George W. Bush, and as he left, the projected debt for the next year was $11 trillion. In 8 years, he had more than doubled the national debt in America. And we were witnessing record deficits. And he said to President Obama, here is next year's budget, and incidentally, it's a $1.2 trillion deficit. Now, how did this reversal occur in just 8 years? It occurred because the policies of the Bush administration called for waging 2 wars and not paying for them, and doing something that had never been done in U.S. history by any president, tax cuts in the middle of a war. A war, of course, is over and above the ordinary expenses of government, and if you cut revenues at the same time, it makes it impossible to balance the budget. In fact, drove us to record high deficits. And that's what President Obama inherited, an $11 trillion national debt and a deficit for the year that he faced, first year in office, of $1.2 trillion, and losing hundreds of thousands of jobs to unemployment as he was being sworn in. Fortunately, the recession that we faced slowed down and starts to stabilize, and as of last Friday, we see the lowest unemployment rate in 2 years. We're coming out of this slowly, but we're coming out of it. We're making this recovery. But the point that we made in the Deficit Commission, and needs to be repeated, is as we chart a glide path to bring us out of this deficit, let's get the recession clearly behind us. Let's get the 14 million Americans unemployed back to work. We're not going to balance a budget with 14 million Americans unemployed. These are people who need the basic necessities of life and are not working and paying taxes. That creates a drain on the Treasury. So we need to move toward restoring jobs, creating good-paying jobs in America as part of our overall agenda. Now, that is the lead-in to Congressman Paul Ryan proposing a budget resolution on his side of the rotunda. He released it today. And as you take a look at this budget resolution, where it leads, you see that Congressman Ryan claims that he will reduce the deficits by $4 trillion, roughly, over the next 10 years compared to the President's budget. But he achieves this solely through spending cuts. But his cuts are focused. Instead of looking at all of the spending of government, he takes a small amount, out of the Pentagon spending, some $78 billion. Well, I will tell you that in light of the Pentagon budget, that is a fractional amount. I want America to be safe. I want our security to never be in question. But I'll tell you, point blank, we waste a lot of money in the Pentagon with contracting out and with things that we shouldn't buy, and we can save a lot of money there. And Congressman Ryan's budget does not address that. He leaves, unfortunately, that aspect of the budget untouched, largely untouched. $78 billion over 5 years is hardly an effort to try to reduce waste and inefficiency in the Department of Defense. Then he turns to the domestic discretionary budget. Now, that represents 12% of the overall budget. That has health care, education, and medical research, things of that nature in it. And that's where he makes the biggest cuts in the coming 5 and 10 years. And when it comes to the revenue side of the equation, should, for example, those who are well off, millionaires in America, pay higher taxes? No. The budget proposed by Congressman Ryan reduces the top marginal rate for individuals and corporations to 25% from 39.6%, producing an enormous windfall with that reduction to the wealthiest individuals and corporations, even as spending for programs that benefit low-income families, like Pell Grants for students and low-income families who go to college, are being slashed under his budget. Because the tax plan is revenue neutral, the plan must by definition include tax increases for lower-income Americans to pay for the tax cuts which Congressman Ryan's budget gives to the wealthiest 2% of America. Is that the key to our future? Cutting taxes for the wealthiest people in this country? Raising taxes for lower and middle-income families? I don't think that's fair. And those of us who love this country and feel blessed that we were given a chance to live here and do well here, I think should accept the reality that we pay back something to this great country and keeping it safe and growing in the right direction. Congressman Ryan's budget resolution goes in the opposite direction, cutting taxes for those who've really been well off in our country, those who are well-to-do. The thing that troubles me the most about Chairman Ryan's budget resolution is what it does to health care. Now, I will tell you, you cannot seriously address the deficit and debt in our country without addressing the cost of health care. And as the presiding officer knows, we spent a lot of time here debating that over the previous 2 years. And we came up with a plan to try to at least reduce the rate of growth in health care costs in America. And I think we achieved some good things, trying to bring more people into coverage when it came to health care and fewer people showing up at hospitals with no insurance, no payment, actually having their medical bills transferred to everyone else. Chairman Ryan released a budget proposal for fiscal year 2012 that would repeal the health reform law which we passed, signed by the President, and it would end Medicare and Medicaid programs as we know them today. His proposal balances the budget, unfortunately, at the expense of those who can least afford it, low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities. First, Chairman Ryan proposes repealing the entire Affordable Care Act. That means that all the consumer protections and benefits put in place by that law would disappear. What does it mean to the average family? Right now, we change the laws so young Americans can stay on their parents' health insurance policies until age 27. And I can tell you, having lived through this experience of putting kids through college, it's a real worry. Your son or daughter graduates from college. They no longer have health insurance through the ordinary means, either through college or through the family, and now they're on their own looking for a job. And if you're like most parents, you worry. They are one diagnosis or one accident away from serious medical bills, and you want them to have the best care. I can tell you how many I can't tell you how many times I asked my son and daughter, do you have health insurance now that you're finished with college? Oh, Dad, I feel great. I'm healthy. I wish we could all be so confident. We changed the laws so that young people could stay under their parents' health insurance plans until age 27. Now, that, I think, is reasonable. The Paul Ryan Republican budget resolution would repeal that. I don't think that's helpful. We also have what's called the donut hole in Medicare, where seniors receive payments for prescription drugs, and there's a gap in coverage called the donut hole. We start filling that in so seniors have seamless coverage so they can have the prescriptions they need to stay healthy, independent, and strong, out of the hospital, out of the nursing home, in the life that they want to lead. Unfortunately, that effort would be repealed by Congressman Paul Ryan's Republican budget resolution. In addition, we put in the law a provision that people with pre-existing conditions wouldn't be denied health insurance. Initially, we protect children. If you have a child who is diabetic, has a history of cancer or some other disease, it might be next to impossible to buy health insurance. We protect that family and say children under the age of 18 cannot be discriminated against because of pre-existing conditions. And unfortunately, Chairman Ryan's proposal would eliminate that protection as well. It also means that health care delivery system reforms put in place by the law, things like bundling payments to medical providers and reducing reimbursements to hospitals with high rates of infection, would go away. These changes are designed to lower health care costs, but the Ryan proposal would eliminate them. His plan is simply cost-shifting, not cost-saving. He had scored by the Congressional Budget Office a bipartisan $1 billion in the first 10 years from our health care reform. So instead of reducing the deficit, Chairman Ryan's proposal will increase the deficit by at least $120 billion by repealing health care reform. Next, Chairman Ryan proposes converting Medicaid into a block grant program. He says this will help the states rein in costs with more flexibility. In fact, it just shifts the cost to states, low-income beneficiaries, and medical providers. When you look at the dollar amounts, he would be reducing Medicaid reimbursement back to the states by 28%. Who were some of the beneficiaries of Medicaid in Illinois, Pennsylvania, in New Hampshire? Well, the beneficiaries include a lot of elderly people living in nursing homes. These are folks who no longer have a savings account to turn to. They have a Medicare payment and a Medicaid payment, and that's it. And if you reduce the reimbursement under Medicaid, unfortunately, many of them can't stay in the nursing homes and convalescent centers that they now live in. So we have to think carefully about the way we deal with Medicaid. By my estimation, my staff estimation, the $770 billion cut in Medicaid with the Ryan budget proposal is about a 28% cut in reimbursement for Medicaid in the years to come. That's not the worst part. The worst part, I'm afraid, is Chairman Ryan proposes ending Medicare as we know it. Back in the 1960s, the creation of Medicare really was the answer to the prayers of many senior citizens. They had Social Security, which provided them with a basic monthly payment that might help them maintain their independence and continue on if their pension or savings didn't cover life's expenses. But then came medical expenses. And with Medicare, we said, if you will pay in through payroll tax through a lifetime, when you retire, you'll be covered with Medicare insurance. Story after story has been told in my family and others of people who found themselves not Medicare eligible, but without health insurance. I had a brother, a late brother, who had heart issues. And he retired as a member of management from Boeing Aircraft and then had a massive heart attack and surgery and then was canceled. His health insurance was canceled before he reached age 65. He was worried that he'd have to dip in savings if he ever had to go back to the hospital. Fortunately for him, he didn't have another problem until he reached Medicare eligibility. So Medicare ends up being a lifeline for many seniors. Otherwise, they would see their savings exhausted, which they'd planned to use for the rest of their life and their security. Chairman Ryan proposes ending Medicare as we know it and instead giving seniors subsidies to enroll in private health insurance plans. This might save some federal funds, but that's because the federal subsidy wouldn't cover the full cost of private plans that are as good as Medicare. I'm glad to see Senator Bill Nelson of Florida on the floor here. My guess is Medicare is a pretty important issue in Florida, and I think you probably have some strong feelings about this issue. But what Chairman Ryan has proposed in the House budget resolution would mean that seniors would lose the guaranteed benefits they have today. How much of a cut in benefits? Well, he's very explicit, 60%. 60% cut in Medicare benefits for senior citizens. How is that going to work? How are we going to find ourselves in a situation where private health insurance companies are somehow going to provide 60% more in services for the current cost? It's not likely to happen. This won't bring down overall health spending, incidentally. It just pushes the cost onto seniors and makes them sicker when they finally show up at the hospital. In fact, Medicare provides health care for seniors at a price less than the same benefits cost in the private market. It's a popular program because it works. The point I'd like to make, and I see my colleague here and I'm going to yield the floor to him, is I share Chairman Ryan's concern about the deficit and concern about health costs. But if we are going to be honest and deal with this, as I said at the outset, we can't cut our way out of this problem. We can't tax our way out of the problem. We have to think our way out of the problem. We have got to find approaches that more effectively use the wonderful medical resources in this country at a savings. We have to reward value when it comes to health care as opposed to volume. We've got to make certain that those who are ripping off current programs see that activity come to an end. If we work together on a bipartisan basis, we can achieve that. I hope, Mr. President, that we can do it on a bipartisan basis because it's the only way that will work. Trying to impose this by one party, whether it's in the continuing resolution or in the long-term budget resolution, is not likely to achieve the goals that most Americans hope we achieve as members of the Senate and Congress. I yield the floor.
Would the Senator yield for a question?
Be happy to yield.
The Senator has pointed out very accurately the analysis of this most recent proposal by the chairman in the House of Representatives. If I recall, did we not address cutting some $400 billion out of Medicare over the next decade in the health care reform bill that was passed last year?
That's exactly right. I say to the senator from Florida, and there were people who were critical of us and said that we were unfortunately cutting Medicare benefits, which we were not. The senator may recall that one of the first amendments on the floor, it may have been from Senator Bennett of Colorado, if I'm not mistaken, said we're going to protect Medicare benefits, but we're going to try to cut the waste out of the current Medicare program, the duplication, the overcharging that's going on. So seniors won't pay in terms of health care, but the taxpayers won't be held responsible for something that really isn't serving them well.
Would the senator, Mr. President, respond to another question?
Be happy to.
Is it true that in the proposal from the chairman in the House of Representatives, that he would take the Medicaid program, which generally is a split, something like 55% federal money with 45% state money for the health care for the poor and the disabled, that his proposal is that he would give this as a block grant to the states for the governors and the state legislatures to decide how they were going to distribute it?
Yes, I'd say to the senator from Florida, that's my understanding, but it also includes a 28% reduction in the amount of money the federal government's going to pay into this. So in your state, and mine too, a lot of elderly people live in nursing homes and depend on Medicaid. Without Medicare and Medicaid, they couldn't stay there. And if you cut by 28% the reimbursement under Medicaid, I wonder what's going to happen to those people.
And would the senator believe that the experience of the state of Florida, when they have tried to put all Medicaid into insurance companies, otherwise known as HMOs, health maintenance organizations, that those organizations pulled out of serving the poor in rural counties, and yet that is a proposal in front of the state legislature of Florida at this very moment?
I would say to the senator from Florida, representing a state as diverse as his, with rural areas and major urban centers, there are some areas where private health insurance companies are not going to do business because it's not profitable. So when Chairman Ryan says we will just try to shift all of this responsibility into the private health insurance market, I'm afraid that many Americans, those in rural areas, maybe some with pre-existing conditions, because he's repealing Affordable Health Care Act too, are going to find themselves without health insurance coverage.
And a further question, Mr. President, to the senator from Illinois. Would he characterize the proposal by the chairman in the House of Representatives on Medicare as not only cutting the payments to Medicare, but the way Medicare is being delivered by altering that into the private sector?
I'd say in response, and this may be my last response because I have to run to a meeting, but the interesting thing about Chairman Ryan's proposal is the money doesn't go to the senior citizen under Medicare. The money goes to the insurance company. Think about that. A voucher to an insurance company, and the hope is that they would provide the coverage you need. Medicare, I want to tell you, is, like Social Security, one of those programs that people have confidence in. They know the coverage, and they know what's happened. Since 1960 under President Johnson, when we initiated Medicare, seniors live longer, they're healthier, they're stronger, and they're independent. That's what you get with good quality health care. And when you start making 60% cuts in Medicare benefits, like Chairman Ryan's House Republican budget proposal, you really run the risk that a lot of people won't get the good coverage they have today under Medicare.
And I would just say in conclusion, and I thank the senator for yielding, that all you have to do is ask a senior citizen, do they like their Medicare, or would they prefer to have it done by an insurance company? And I think you'll get a resounding answer.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I'd like to take a few minutes this afternoon to perhaps switch the discussion from what my colleagues were referring to earlier in terms of the budget and speak a little bit about the issue of energy, obviously a topic of great concern. The President has addressed it as recently as last week in a major address here at Georgetown, and a lot of discussions about what it is that we need to do to respond to the higher prices that families are paying at the pump, and just how we deal with the issue of energy in general. And there's been much discussion about this concept of use it or lose it. And I want to speak to that proposal a little bit this afternoon. It's a rather strange proposal that claims to address the rising cost of oil and gas for America's working families. And the premise of this is that even with oil at more than $100 a barrel, and even though lease terms are already limited by law to 5 to 10 years, energy companies somehow are hoarding federal lands and refusing to produce the resources that are beneath them. Use it or lose it has been presented by this administration and others as a way to increase our nation's energy production, but even a cursory review will show that this is fundamentally flawed in its premise. This proposal will not increase American production. It will not increase jobs or create jobs. It will not raise government revenues or bolster our security. Instead, I believe it's a diversion from our more critical need to produce more of our own resources and to streamline our burdensome regulatory processes. Now, the idea behind use it or lose it is to simply punish companies for not drilling on lands that they have leased, so they either drill or they give back the acreage to the government, which can then resell it to someone else. But interestingly, this proposal has drawn some support from a number of senators and from the President himself, who have said until recently, they've claimed that, well, we can't drill our way out of this. We can't drill our way to lower gas prices. America's oil, and we've been repeatedly told this, has minimal impact on global prices and takes too long to bring online. So I don't know, maybe this is a change of heart. If that's so, I'm glad to see it. I do hope that their proposal is a signal that indeed they would like to see drilling on every leased federal acre, onshore, offshore. That's certainly the premise of this proposal, even though it's perhaps a pretty major departure from the previous positions. Now, the advocates of use it or lose it have pointed out correctly that there are millions of acres leased in this country that are not currently producing oil and gas. But they have misidentified the reason why. Chances are maybe there's just no oil present on that land. Perhaps exploration is ongoing. Or, in many cases, the federal government has simply blocked the drilling. And to add a new penalty to this process and to add a new layer to existing bureaucracy will only backfire. From the outset, I think it's important to understand what is involved in oil and gas production. This is an incredibly capital-intensive, labor-intensive business. And from a technological perspective, the process is really extraordinarily complex. I think we saw after the Deepwater Horizon, cameras trained a mile below the surface of the ocean there, and it was described by many as this is akin to how we deal with putting a man on the moon. This is complicated stuff here, and there's no X marks the spot as to where that oil is actually going to be found. It can take years, not to mention tremendous amounts of money, to finally locate these commercial deposits. And when there is resource present, it takes some teams of some pretty highly skilled and trained engineers to figure out how we're going to bring it to market. The entire legal systems, the legal departments that have to wade through the multitude of the permits, the analysis, the plans that are required by our federal government. This process takes a considerable amount of patience and, for lots of good reasons, but the government is certainly not in a hurry to provide leaseholders the approval that they need to move forward. Last week, the Interior Department had an opportunity to explain what goes on within the exploration process and show why not all federal leases immediately produce oil and gas. And instead, what they did was the Interior Department issued a report that attempts to portray many federal leases as idle or unused. What really could have been a very helpful and instructive process was instead, I think, hopelessly politicized, and that's really very unfortunate. The findings of the Interior Department's report, I believe, defy common sense, general business principles, and what we know to be true about the federal regulatory process. The definition of inactive purposefully excludes many important development activities, and there's no acknowledgement that oftentimes it is the government itself that is causing the delays in drilling. Now, one of the more, I guess, telling examples of what's wrong with the Interior Department's new report is its depiction of what is happening up in Alaska right now. Companies have been trying for years to bring their federal leases in the state of Alaska into production. These efforts have been blocked. They have been delayed by the federal government, especially this administration, and they've been blocked at every turn. And despite this, the Interior Department's report claims that just 1% of Alaska's leases are producing and puts the blame on industry. Well, when I talk to folks back home, when I talk to those who are trying every single day, getting up and trying their hardest to advance so that we can get to levels of production, only to find that there is yet one more hurdle, one more roadblock that is thrown up by the government. It causes incredible frustration. It really is hard to pick what would be described as the best example of companies trying to produce from their leases, which, I might add, they've purchased at the invitation of the federal government, and yet they're being forbidden by the administration from pursuing their exploratory operations. It's happening in the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. Think about the name. This is the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. Pretty ironic. We can't get started there. And one of the reasons, the biggest reason that we can't, is we're being blocked. The producers are being blocked from getting a permit to build a bridge over a river to get started. Now, as regrettable and really as ironic as that example is, there's even a more higher profile example that we see up north, and this is what Shell is attempting to do. They have set a record, and a record that is certainly not enviable, but a record nonetheless for both dollars invested and frustration experienced in return. This is a situation where a company has spent a little over $4 billion. This is billion with a B. They've spent $4 billion to buy federal acreage in Alaska's Outer Continental Shelf nearly 7 years ago. Since that time, Shell has done nothing but slog through an incredibly long and incredibly arduous permitting process. Air permits that take 6 weeks to acquire in the Gulf of Mexico have now been delayed for over 5 years. Mr. President, I ask you just to put that in context. A company, at the invitation of the federal government, purchases leases, purchased them over 7 years ago, has put more than $4 billion into trying to get to exploration. 5 years waiting on permits, where in other parts of the country, permits can be turned around in 6 weeks, and they have yet the opportunity to even start. So can anyone honestly suggest that we ought to punish Shell or any company who's going through this for the federal government's failure to allow even exploratory drilling to proceed? Is it fair that we demand that Shell pay the price because the government has failed to issue a permit that even the EPA, even the administrator of the EPA, has acknowledged poses no human health risk? This is where we're sitting right now. I I was just incredulous. I had an opportunity to ask the Secretary of the Interior, who is a friend of mine, most certainly a friend that I acknowledge has a very, very difficult job, a very challenging job, but he could not assure me. He could not assure me that the so-called use it or lose it fee would not apply to the millions of acres of leased lands in Alaska, both onshore and offshore, where the federal government has sold the leases but is not allowing drilling activity. Mr. President, it's like a commercial real estate company offering to rent some office space to you. We go ahead, you pay the rent, I never give you the key, so you can't access your commercial office space here. And then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to assess a fine. We're going to penalize you when you fail to open your doors for business. That's kind of what's happening up north. It's not a use it or lose it policy. It's a heads we win, tails you lose. And you have to imagine, what would such a policy say about the way that our government conducts its business and manages its resources? Use it or lose it is drawn from a desire to do the right thing, and that's to increase our domestic production. But I also believe that it reveals a fundamental lack of understanding about how energy resources are developed and how they're brought to market. It risks very real consequences for our energy production here in America, because instead of encouraging producers to find energy faster, it would actually discourage them from discovering it in the first place. Instead of creating jobs, it would likely end jobs. Instead of raising new revenues for the federal government, it would likely diminish taxpayers' returns from leasing and production. It seems like every time that oil prices are on the rise, we come together, we debate how we're going to respond to them, and every time someone points out that we should be producing far more of our own, frankly, a very tremendous resource base, someone steps forward with the potential scapegoat, perhaps to distract attention from the need that we need to be leasing more new lands. It's like clockwork around here. Instead of making the hard choices about what we can do to better insulate ourselves from higher crude prices and geopolitical instability, we see proposals to impose windfall profit taxes, to pour unprecedented sums of money into unproven alternative technologies, to rein in speculators, to sue OPEC, to raise taxes and fees on productions, and now to force companies to act faster or to face greater penalties. Until we see some evidence that companies are refusing to develop their leases, I've got to call it like I see it. Use it or lose it is a claim that if you support increased domestic production without doing anything to ensure that domestic production is the actual result of our federal energy policies. Now, been a lot of discussion when we're talking about energy, been a lot of discussion about Brazil and their potential, how that nation is set to significantly ramp up its oil production. And we commend the Brazilians. They've been able to make a number of very important discoveries, estimated about 50 billion barrels of oil equivalent. According to the Wall Street Journal, Brazil's oil production rose by 876% over the past 20 years, 876% over the past 20 years. They're now planning to double their current production in less than 10 years. Some pretty remarkable things that are going on there. And even while Brazil is developing their current resource base, they're actively looking for more. They are working aggressively. And they're pursuing that objective while expanding their production and their use of alternative energy sources. They're kind of pursuing the all of the above that we talk about so often here. Here in the United States, we have technically recoverable oil resources estimated at 157 billion barrels, more than three times what Brazil has recently found. I don't understand why we refuse to set the same ambitious goals for increasing our production that Brazil has, even as we continue to pursue alternative energies that will diversify our supplies, equally important. When it comes to energy, we should strive to be our own best customer, not Brazil's. As federal policymakers, we need to think carefully about what we demand of any industry, including oil and gas. And when you tax something, the fact of the matter is you get less of it. And I don't think we want to make ourselves even more dependent on foreign oil right now. We don't want to discourage domestic production, especially under the guise of promoting it. And we have no reason to yet add another layer to an already daunting regulatory system. I would strongly urge us in the Senate, here in the Congress, to recognize use it or lose it for what it is. It's an attempt to extract more money from the companies, not to extract more energy from the ground. It's not the right approach for America, and it will not move our energy policy in the right direction. Now, I do take, I guess, comfort in one fact, and that's this. At least the debate is now about how to produce more oil and not whether to produce more oil. My work on the Energy Committee, certainly what goes on in the state of Alaska, has taught me much about how and how not to achieve greater oil production if we want more domestic production. And I think we all recognize the President's verbal commitment to this and the change of heart amongst some of my colleagues. It's time to eliminate the needless red tape and allow access to America's huge resources that are still off limits. Mr. President, I thank you for the time this afternoon, the opportunity to speak on yet another aspect of our country's much-needed energy policy and how we can continue to find those ways that will move us towards a future where we do engage in energy sources that are clean and renewable, while also harvesting our bountiful harvests here in this country as we find out ways to produce more domestically. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, would the senator yield for a question?
Yes. Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, first of all, I want to say to the senator from Alaska that she knows my respect for her and my personal friendship with her and my personal opinion that she is one of the finest senators that we have. I do want to ask the senator a question, and it's just circumstance that I happen to be here to be next in line to speak about a different subject than what the senator spoke about. This senator is one of those sponsors of the Use It or Lose It legislation. And I certainly will defer to the senator from Alaska with regard to Alaska and the drilling offshore there. But my question is about the drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, of which this senator has some familiarity, that there are 37 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico under lease where the oil is, but of the 37 million acres, there are only 7 million that are drilled. 30 million acres are not drilled and have been that way for years and years. So the senator makes a compelling argument with regard to Alaska, but how can that argument apply to the 30 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico that are not drilled, but, as the senator has said, ought to be drilled?
Well, Mr. President,